That's good because I was wondering how I would prop up my notes, and now I've got a thing, and I didn't have to write them so big that I can see them from the floor. Hello. The first time I ever saw an image of fascism, I must have been about 5 years old, and I was born in 1960, so it's a long time ago. There was this TV program called All Our Yesterdays. Actually, every word of that has got kind of ideological meaning, hasn't it? All Our Yesterdays. And it was a very gentle historical program about World War II, which had finished 15 years before I was born. And we used to watch it, and watch it in my appointment to view, as we call it in the TV business. Everybody sat down and we put on All Our Yesterdays, and this very avuncular man came on and explained how we had won the war. And then this one episode came on, and before I didn't know what was going on. I'm sitting there, I'm 5 or 6 years old. My mother leaps from the chair and switches it off. Just before she switched it off, I saw this very strange image of a pile of bodies being bulldozed into a grave. And my mum says, "We're not watching this." Now, Mum was half Jewish and had spent the entire war, I later found out, the war started when she was 5 years old, and she spent the whole war worrying about an obvious problem, which is what she was going to do if the Nazis invaded Britain. And I later realized, of course, it wasn't my eyes that she was trying to shield in circa 1965 from this image. It was hers. Now, that's my first encounter with this thing that should and does haunt us, fascism. I'll tell you about my second encounter. So it can't have been too much later, because I've researched this bit. In the 60s, there was a bubblegum card thing. Now, some people in this room are so young, you probably have never had bubblegum. But certainly you have never seen a bubblegum card. And the bubblegum cards were cards which were you collected them. And then once you got every one, you swapped them with your friends. And it was a really cool thing to do. In the mid-60s, there was a bubblegum card set, believe it or not, about the atrocities of World War II. And some of them were really horrible, but there was one card that was banned. There were rumors about it, and you would say, "Have you seen this card?" I think it was number 66. And I finally saw number 66. And to the 6 or 7-year-old eyes that I had then, it was quite shocking, because it wasn't about torture. There wasn't much violence at all actually going on in it. It was a picture of a really beautiful woman being whipped by a fat, naked man with a Nazi in leathers watching it happen. Now, I had inadvertently stumbled on a thing that I later came to understand theoretically, that fascism became the repository after the war of two quite important things. One, otherness, forbiddenness. The card was not allowed to be seen. Why? Because it was depicting quite clearly, I now see it. I mean, it's not impossible not to recognize what it is. It's a sadomasochistic sex scene. And that was the other thing that Nazism particularly had come to represent in post-war culture, the forbidden other. So there's the forbidden other, and there's the switched-off TV series, and that's it for me. I didn't really think about fascism until I got to university. And it became clear at that point that we'd kind of left fascism behind. I went on some anti-Nazi demos, and we chanted "Never Again" at some skinheads, and it all got very feisty. But the assumption was, for my generation, that fascism was something that had happened in the past that was really horrible, that we had to learn about, and that we had to. Well, you couldn't avoid this when David Bowie's dressed up as a fascist, that you had to understand that some of its allure was to do with this otherness, with this forbiddenness, with this almost kind of throwing in the face of stable societies that that subterranean desire that I'd seen in this card. Now, I think we're going to have to think quite hard about fascism because it's back. And when I researched my current book, Clear Bright Future, it's not primarily about fascism. It's about a defense of radical humanism. And one of the threats to radical humanism is fascism. But the more research I've done, the more I've come to the conclusion that we don't really have a theory of what fascism was. Or, rather, that we have a lot of theories. We've got almost as many theories as we had bubblegum cards, and you cannot almost swap them because no matter how different they are, none of them really explain it. And I'll just run through them in case you've never encountered this world. The first theory of fascism I encountered was the Marxist one, which is it's rooted in the class dynamics of 20th century society, not 19th, and by implication, not 21st century society. 20th century society had very strong workers' movements in Germany, Italy, and Spain, so strong that they challenged in Spain, Catholic supremacy. In Italy, they challenged the bosses of Fiat and Lancia, and in Germany, they challenged the Junker aristocracy. And therefore, those elites had to look for something that could defeat a left-wing labour movement. That's a very plausible theory, and it's one that I still think explains why fascism happened at the time when it happened. The Italian workers seized their factories in 1919 and tried to run them without managers. 2 years later, Mussolini took power. German workers stopped the war. How did World War I end? The German workers stopped it with a mutiny. And the elite said, well, you stopped our war. We need something to stop you. And it's plausible, but I'd just say hold that thought. After the kind of crude kind of class explanations of fascism kind of didn't quite explain everything, like why did it take the form of men strutting around in leathers, you then get the psychological explanations, some of which are pure straight out of Freudianism, some are from the Marxist Freudian writer Wilhelm Reich, who said it was to do with the sexual repression of German society in the pre-war era. It produced lots of Oedipal young men who needed a father figure, and there's Hitler. Then, in the Cold War, we had the totalitarianism theory, which is mainly associated with Hannah Arendt, although there's many other people who had this, which is that fascism and Soviet communism were basically the same thing, and they represented a tiredness among humanity inculcated by what Franz Kafka describes in his novels, the incredible bureaucratic facelessness of the society we lived in the mid-20th century, when just even to get a telephone line attached to your house took you 3 years and hundreds of forms to be filled in. So totalitarianism gave rise to fascism, and it could be left-wing or it could be right-wing. And then there's a quite prevalent stream which says it's about national characteristics. So because Germany had Max Stirner, and then it had Nietzsche, and it had Richard Wagner, and then it had Spengler in the 20th century. You had this philosophical roots of a society that hated itself, and it was always going to... The German character, it was said at the end of World War II, the German character had disintegrated. The national character had disintegrated. I'm not sure any of these things, interesting though they are, actually explain it. Why we have got guys walking into a synagogue in Halle, a kebab shop or shisha bar in Hanau last week, into a camp of perfectly reformist Norwegian Labour Party young people in 2011 and shooting them. I'm not sure whether any of this explains that. Now, the obvious problem is, as well, when I wrote the book, Clear Bright Future, what I was focused on was the new alliance of elite people and right-wing demagogues. Trump is an example. Narendra Modi is an example in India. You've got Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil. What we've got here are authoritarian conservative politicians who are prepared to reach into society and mobilize people in a right-wing way. That's not fascism. And the focus has been very much on, in political science, differentiating those people from fascism. They should be differentiated from fascism, that's right. But the assumption, almost shared between some political scientists and some politicians, is it's almost like this: if Farage is successful, we don't get Tommy Robinson. If Bolsonaro is successful, you don't get lynchings in the Brazilian rainforest of indigenous people. You just get, they burn the forest and they let them go. The genocidal urges of fascism are stemmed by allowing the right to have control of society. But I don't think this is happening. Since writing the book, I've come to the conclusion that the opposite is happening, that in fact they are feeding off each other. In the book, my explanation of, not of fascism, but of what's going on, is like this. Arendt says, in opposition to the theory of German exceptionalism, Hannah Arendt said, no, it wasn't the German character that caused fascism, it was the disintegration of the German character. Something caused it to fall apart. Now, drawing on that as an inspiration, I think what's happening is that what I call the neoliberal self is falling apart. The self molded around a free market certainty that we've all lived in is kind of falling apart as that certainty also falls apart. And what should we be both scared about and hopeful about? Because I am not frightened of fascism. I take the view, the same view as the character in the Big Lebowski. You know, it's nothing to be frightened about. What is at the heart of the recrudescence of far-right thinking, I think, is dehumanization. The ability to see human beings as either hierarchically lower down the ranks than you are, or not human at all. What does the average far-right, alt-right person think on the internet? They think, and there is a big dissection of this in my book, they think that white alpha males should run the world and that women should be below them and that anybody of colour should be below that. And what's wrong with the world is that some people of colour and some women are actually higher than alpha males. That's the theory. This is why in the book I think that misogyny is equally important to modern fascism as racism is. But it made me think. I travelled to the concentration camp museum at Majdanek near Lublin in Poland. And it's always worth doing these trips. I think you will never regret visiting somewhere like this. But I was wondering what I would think when I saw the whole thing, the whole gas chamber type thing. And what I thought was, fucking hell, this is flimsy. These posts that kept thousands of people behind, you know, in a concentration camp are this thick. They're like the posts that used to be around your school playground, little concrete posts, and the huts are made of pine wood, and really, you know, I'm not surprised that 500 people escaped from that concentration camp. You know, 500 people escaped from Majdanek. 80,000, it's quite a low number, were killed. 500,000 people, 500 people killed, 500 people escaped. Nobody would escape if we built that camp now. It would have facial recognition, it would have biometrics, it would have probably a gift shop, it would probably have an ISO qualification for carbon neutrality. Well, I say this because Guantanamo has a gift shop for the staff. It would be inescapable. It would be quite like one of the American high security prisons, or Guantanamo. And all it would need to turn what we have already created into one of these places is what the Nazis brought to these places, and what, when you interview, as I have done, the privilege of interviewing the few surviving people that one can lay hold of, what they always say is, the Nazis didn't see us as human. And so I think the rational grounds for fear that we should have is the return of anti-humanism, of the dehumanization of people. But I want to finish in a half minute that I've got left with something positive. The other thing that I don't think we've really understood is anti-fascism. And if you want a very quick way of demonstrating it, you could read one of the biographies of somebody like Violette Szabo, the SOE operative who tortured to death by the Nazis, or just watch Casablanca. Casablanca is the story of a person developing what I now call an anti-fascist morality. What Bogart's character does in Casablanca isn't just to decide to act. All protagonists in a narrative decide to act. Bogart develops a new morality, a virtue ethics of what he's going to do about the world. And it's no accident that that movie was written by left-wing Jews in America who wanted America to develop a new morality about what it was going to do about the world. I think that the great misunderstanding is not just of what fascism did and what it was, because it needs to be complex, and we need to understand why it's possible that it can come back when when an illusion fails. But we also need to understand how easy it was for that very, very downtrodden and cynical generation that you will see depicted in all 1930s movies, film noir, how actually easy it was for them when confronted with this ultimate threat to decide to take moral actions and stances that they didn't expect themselves to take. Now, I hope some of the other introductions here are cheerier than that, but I hope you also understand why I am not downhearted about this, because I think everybody in this room is equally capable of making a moral transition and transformation once we understand the nature of the threat. But I do think we have to do more thinking about the nature of the threat. Thinking is a very powerful thing to do when faced with something that seems more powerful than you. Otherwise, the David and Goliath story would be a pointless story. Thank you. Thank you.